14 years ago, on a frigid March evening in Bismarck, North Dakota, 21-year-old Eleanor Adams disappeared into the darkness after leaving her shift at Gateway Mall. Her silver Honda Civic vanished with her, leaving investigators with no witnesses, no surveillance footage, and a trail that seemed to evaporate into the prairie wind. Police suspected abduction, but with each passing day, leads grew colder and hope dimmed. Yet in a modest house on Elm Street, Eleanor's mother refused to surrender to despair, keeping the front porch light burning every single night for over a decade. Then, in 2023, advanced DNA technology breathed life into evidence that had sat silent for years, revealing a betrayal so close to home it would shatter an entire community's sense of safety. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more investigations. March 15, 2011. The last patches of North Dakota snow clung stubbornly to the edges of Gateway Mall's parking lot, reflecting the harsh yellow glow of sodium lights that cast long shadows across the nearly empty asphalt. Inside the Barnes & Noble where she worked part-time, Eleanor Adams was finishing her Tuesday evening shift, straightening books and helping the last few customers before closing time at 9 o'clock. At 21, Eleanor possessed the kind of infectious optimism that drew people to her like moths to flame. Her auburn hair caught the fluorescent store lights as she moved between the aisles, her green eyes sparkling with the same enthusiasm, whether she was discussing Victorian literature with a customer or planning weekend adventures with friends. A junior at the University of North Dakota, majoring in English with dreams of becoming a teacher, Eleanor had that rare quality of making everyone around her feel heard and valued. She had this way of remembering little details about people. Her coworker Sarah Mitchell would later tell investigators. A customer's dog's name, what book their kid was reading. Eleanor made everyone feel like they mattered. That evening, Eleanor had texted her roommate Jessica around 8:30, "Dead here tonight. Closing early, home by 9:15, for our study session." The exclamation point was so typically Eleanor, finding joy even in mundane Tuesday routines. She'd been looking forward to cramming for their American literature midterm, while sharing a bag of microwave popcorn and gossiping about their weekend plans. At 8:47 p.m., security cameras captured Eleanor's final moments inside the mall. She walked briskly toward the employee exit, her leather messenger bag slung across her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. The grainy footage showed her pushing through the heavy glass doors, her breath visible in small puffs as she stepped into the March chill. She was talking to her mother, confirming dinner plans for the following evening. She sounded completely normal, her mother, Patricia Adams, would later recall, her voice breaking slightly. Happy even. She told me she loved me before hanging up. That was our Eleanor, never ending a call without saying it. The employee parking area sat in a poorly lit corner of the mall's vast lot, where a flickering light cast intermittent shadows between the scattered vehicles. Eleanor's silver 2008 Honda Civic was parked in her usual spot, 3 spaces from the dumpster, where delivery trucks made their morning rounds. At 8:52 p.m., Eleanor sent her final text message to Jessica, "Heading home now, put the popcorn on." But Eleanor Adams never made it home that night. The 10-minute drive along familiar streets lined with modest ranch houses and towering cottonwood trees, a route she'd traveled hundreds of times, became a journey into the unknown. Her phone went straight to voicemail after 9. Her car disappeared from the parking lot sometime between closing and the next morning's shift change. In the Adams family's kitchen on Elm Street, Patricia kept Eleanor's dinner plate warm until nearly midnight, calling her daughter's phone every few minutes, as worry transformed into dread. The untouched plate of lasagna, Eleanor's favorite, would remain on the counter for 3 days, a silent testament to a mother's desperate hope that her daughter might still walk through the front door, apologizing for being late with that characteristic smile that could light up any room. By dawn on March 16th, Eleanor Adams had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions, fear, and a family that would spend the next 14 years searching for answers in the endless North Dakota sky. The morning sun painted Patricia Adams' kitchen in soft golden hues, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the cold dread settling in her chest as she stared at Eleanor's untouched breakfast plate. At 7:30 a.m. on March 16th, she'd prepared her daughter's usual scrambled eggs, wheat toast and orange juice, expecting to hear footsteps on the stairs any moment. Eleanor was never late for her Wednesday morning American literature class. By 8:15 a.m., when Eleanor's alarm had been ringing unanswered for 20 minutes, Patricia climbed the stairs to her daughter's bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing an unmade bed, and the previous day's clothes draped over the desk chair. Eleanor's backpack sat packed by the door, ready for classes that would never come. "Eleanor?" Patricia called, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. The silence that answered felt wrong, unnatural in a house where Eleanor's laughter usually filled every corner. Patricia's hands trembled as she dialed Eleanor's cell phone, listening to it ring once before going straight to voicemail. Her daughter's cheerful recorded voice, "Hi, you've reached Eleanor. Leave me a message, and I'll call you back as soon as I can," felt like a ghost speaking from another world. Within minutes, Patricia was calling Jessica, Eleanor's roommate and study partner. "Is Eleanor with you?" she asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "What? No. She was supposed to be home last night," Jessica replied, confusion evident in her tone. "We had plans to study. I waited until almost 11, then figured she'd gotten caught up with something. Is everything okay?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Everything was not okay. Patricia's next call went to Eleanor's supervisor at Barnes & Noble. "She left right on time last night," manager David Chen confirmed. "Walked out through the employee exit around 8:45, said she'd see me Thursday." By 9:30 a.m., Patricia had called every friend, classmate, and coworker on Eleanor's phone. No one had seen or heard from her since the previous evening. The knot of fear in Patricia's stomach grew tighter with each conversation. Her husband Robert, a maintenance supervisor at the local power plant, rushed home from work to find Patricia pacing the living room, Eleanor's phone clutched in her hands. "She's never done this," Patricia whispered. "Never just disappear without calling." Robert, a man of few words but decisive action, immediately called the Bismarck Police Department. The dispatcher's calm professionalism couldn't mask the urgency as she took down Eleanor's information. 21 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, auburn hair, green eyes, last seen leaving Gateway Mall at approximately. "We'll have an officer there within the hour," the dispatcher promised. Officer Jennifer Martinez arrived at the Adams home at 10:45 a.m., her patrol car's presence on quiet Elm Street, drawing curious glances from neighbors. Martinez, a veteran with over a decade of experience, recognized the signs of genuine distress in Patricia's red-rimmed eyes and Robert's tightly clenched fists. "Tell me about Eleanor's routine," Martinez requested, settling into the family's modest living room, where framed photos of Eleanor smiled down from every surface, graduation pictures, family vacations, candid shots of a young woman embracing life with infectious joy. As Patricia recounted the previous evening's events, Martinez took detailed notes. The timeline was straightforward. Eleanor had left work at the usual time, spoken with her mother during her walk to the car, sent a text message at 8:52 p.m., and then vanished. "We'll need to check the mall parking lot," Martinez explained. "See if her car's still there." The drive to Gateway Mall took 12 minutes through Bismarck's tree-lined streets. The March morning was crisp, with temperatures hovering just above freezing, as patches of snow melted into small rivulets that ran toward storm drains. The mall's parking lot, vast and mostly empty in the late morning hours, stretched before them like a concrete ocean. Eleanor's silver Honda Civic was nowhere to be found. Martinez walked the employee parking area where Eleanor should have retrieved her car, her trained eyes scanning for any sign of disturbance. The asphalt was clean, except for a few scattered pieces of trash, and the inevitable stains left by years of vehicles. No skid marks, no signs of struggle, no indication that anything unusual had occurred in this unremarkable corner of suburban North Dakota. Within hours, Eleanor Adams was officially classified as a missing person, and her description was broadcast across police networks throughout the region. The search for a young woman who had simply vanished into the prairie night had begun, setting in motion an investigation that would test a community's faith, challenge a family's endurance, and ultimately reveal that evil could hide behind the most familiar faces. The Burleigh County Sheriff's Department mobilized with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine on March 17, transforming their quiet administrative morning into the command center for the largest missing person search in recent memory. Sheriff Dale Morrison, a weathered man with 30 years of law enforcement experience, stood before a hastily assembled task force in the department's main briefing room, Eleanor's photo pinned prominently to the corkboard behind him. 24 hours, Morrison announced to the room of deputies, state troopers, and volunteers. We know from statistics that the first 48 hours are critical, and we're already halfway there. The search began at dawn, with teams spreading across Bismarck's sprawling landscape like ripples across a pond. The city sat nestled along the Missouri River, surrounded by vast expanses of farmland that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Somewhere in that endless prairie, Eleanor Adams and her silver Honda Civic had vanished without a trace. Detective Ray Kowalski, assigned as lead investigator, coordinated the ground search from a mobile command post set up in the Gateway Mall parking lot. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were searching for Eleanor from the very place she'd last been seen. His radio crackled constantly with updates from search teams. Sector 7 clear, nothing in the riverbank area. Abandoned vehicle on Highway 83, not our target. Above them, a North Dakota Highway Patrol helicopter swept across the landscape in methodical grid patterns, its rotors beating a steady rhythm against the gray March sky. The pilot, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, had volunteered for overtime, drawn by the same sense of urgency that had mobilized dozens of other officers and volunteers. From up here, you realize how much empty space we're dealing with, Rodriguez reported over the radio. Miles and miles of farmland, every field looking exactly like the last. On the ground, search and rescue teams from 3 counties converged on the most likely areas. Cadaver dogs, their noses trained to detect even the faintest scent of human remains, worked tirelessly through abandoned farmsteads and overgrown ditches. Their handlers, experienced volunteers who'd worked dozens of similar cases, watched their animals' behavior carefully for any sign of interest. The Missouri River presented its own challenges. Despite the March chill, dive teams from the Bismarck Fire Department suited up in thick neoprene, prepared to search the murky depths where the current ran swift and cold. The water temperature hovered just above freezing, making their work both dangerous and exhausting. If a vehicle went into the river, the current could have carried it miles downstream, explained dive team leader Michael Thompson as he adjusted his gear. We're checking every boat ramp, every access point, every place where someone might have gone in, accidentally or otherwise. Meanwhile, the technical investigation proceeded with 2011's limited capabilities. Cell phone triangulation, a relatively new tool at the time, showed Eleanor's phone had last connected to a tower near the mall before going completely silent. The lack of additional pings suggested either the phone had been destroyed or taken to an area with no coverage, which was entirely possible in rural North Dakota. Back then, we didn't have the GPS tracking capabilities we have today, Detective Kowalski would later reflect. Cell phones were still pretty basic. We were working with what amounted to educated guesses about location. The mall's security system provided additional frustration. While cameras covered the main entrances and some interior areas, the employee parking lot, where Eleanor had disappeared, was a blind spot. The single camera that might have captured her departure had been malfunctioning for weeks, a detail that hadn't seemed important until now. As the search entered its 3rd day, the volunteer effort grew exponentially. Local churches organized prayer vigils that doubled as volunteer recruitment drives. The University of North Dakota sent busloads of students to help with ground searches. Local businesses donated food, water, and equipment to sustain the around-the-clock effort. Patricia Adams stationed herself at the command post, her eyes never leaving the horizon as search teams reported in every hour. She clutched a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold, her vigil fueled by a mother's desperate hope and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "She's out there somewhere," Patricia whispered to anyone who would listen. "Eleanor's strong, she's a fighter. We just have to find her. Robert Adams took a more active approach, joining ground search teams despite having no formal training. He walked fence lines and checked abandoned buildings with the methodical determination of a man who understood that standing still meant accepting the unacceptable. As the sun set on March 19th, casting long shadows across the empty fields, the reality began to settle over the search effort like a heavy blanket. 3 days of intensive searching had yielded nothing. No trace of Eleanor, no sign of her vehicle, no evidence of what had happened during those missing minutes between the mall parking lot and her intended destination. But in North Dakota, where neighbors helped neighbors and communities rallied around their own, the search was far from over. It was simply evolving from a rescue mission into something more complex, more patient, and infinitely more heartbreaking. The news of Eleanor Adams' disappearance spread through Bismarck like wildfire across dry prairie grass, igniting a community-wide response that transformed quiet neighborhoods into networks of vigilant watchers and determined searchers. By March 20th, 4 days after Eleanor vanished, every grocery store checkout counter displayed her smiling photograph, and missing person flyers fluttered from telephone poles like desperate prayers cast into the wind. At Prairie Rose Baptist Church on Sunday morning, Pastor Michael Hendricks devoted his entire sermon to the power of community in times of crisis. The congregation, swelled to twice its normal size by newcomers drawn by shared concern, bowed their heads as he led them in prayer for Eleanor's safe return. The church parking lot, usually empty by noon, remained packed as volunteers organized search parties and developed strategies for canvassing neighborhoods that hadn't yet been thoroughly examined. Eleanor Adams could be anyone's daughter, Pastor Hendricks announced from the pulpit, his voice carrying the weight of a community's collective worry. We don't rest until she's home. The Bismarck Tribune ran Eleanor's story on the front page 3 days running, each article accompanied by increasingly detailed descriptions and timeline reconstructions. Editor Sarah Williams, a 20-year veteran of local journalism, had covered missing person cases before, but something about Eleanor's story struck a deeper chord. Usually there's something, Williams explained to her staff during their morning editorial meeting. A troubled relationship, financial problems, a history of risky behavior. But Eleanor Adams was living a completely ordinary life. That's what makes this so terrifying. It could happen to anyone. The newspaper's decision to publish Eleanor's daily routine, her work schedule, her favorite restaurants, her usual routes around town, triggered an avalanche of tips that quickly overwhelmed the sheriff's department's phone system. Citizens reported seeing silver Honda Civics in locations ranging from downtown Bismarck to remote farm roads 50 miles away. Detective Kowalski found himself managing a tip hotline that rang constantly. Each call was logged, investigated, and ultimately ruled out, but the sheer volume represented something unprecedented in Burleigh County law enforcement history. Ma'am, I understand you saw a silver car near the gas station on Highway 1804, he said into the phone for what felt like the 100th time that week. Can you describe the driver? I see. And what time was this? We'll send someone to check it out. Most tips proved to be cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking, but each required investigation. A silver car spotted near Mandan turned out to belong to a local teacher heading home from evening classes. A suspicious vehicle seen parked behind a convenience store was traced to a night shift worker catching a brief nap between jobs. However, one category of tips proved particularly intriguing. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Eleanor's distinctive Honda Civic in the hours after her disappearance, suggesting she might have been driven around the area rather than immediately taken far from Bismarck. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse returning from her evening shift at Sanford Medical Center, contacted police on March 21st with information that made investigators take notice. I saw that exact car around 11:30 that Tuesday night, she told Detective Kowalski. Silver Honda, same year model. It was heading north on Washington Street, driving slowly, like whoever was behind the wheel was looking for something. Walsh's description was precise. She'd noticed the car because it had been traveling well below the speed limit, unusual for that time of night on a normally busy street. While she hadn't been able to see the driver clearly, she was certain about the vehicle and the time frame. Similar reports trickled in throughout the week. A convenience store clerk remembered serving someone who drove a silver Honda around midnight on March 15th, though he couldn't recall details about the customer. A security guard at a local office complex noticed a car matching Eleanor's description in the parking lot during his rounds, but by the time he finished his circuit, the vehicle was gone. The accumulating witness accounts began to paint a disturbing picture. Eleanor's car had possibly been driven around Bismarck for hours after her disappearance, suggesting either that she was being held against her will or that someone else was driving her vehicle. Community meetings, hastily organized in school gymnasiums and church fellowship halls, drew crowds of concerned residents, eager to help but increasingly fearful for their own safety. Parents began driving their college-age daughters to and from work. Evening shifts at retail stores started implementing buddy systems for employees leaving after dark. "This changes everything," admitted Rebecca Martinez, a mother of 2 teenage daughters during a community meeting at Century High School. "We always felt safe here. Bismarck isn't the kind of place where young women just disappear." The fear was palpable, but so was the determination. Volunteer search parties organized through social media and word of mouth continued scouring areas outside the official investigation scope. Local businesses donated supplies, restaurants provided free meals to searchers, and even competing auto dealerships collaborated to loan vehicles for search efforts. Eleanor's case had become more than a missing person investigation. It had evolved into a community-defining moment that would test Bismarck's faith in its own safety and solidarity. Every tip, no matter how seemingly insignificant, represented a thread of hope that someone somewhere held the key to bringing Eleanor Adams home. But as March gave way to April and the tips continued to lead nowhere, that hope began to feel increasingly fragile, like prairie grass bending before an inevitable storm. April arrived in North Dakota with the cruel promise of spring. Melting snow revealing empty fields and drainage ditches that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. In the Burleigh County Sheriff's Department, Detective Ray Kowalski stood before an evidence board that told a frustratingly incomplete story. Dozens of photos, timeline charts, and witness statements that seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The investigation had consumed nearly a month, involving over 200 interviews, countless hours of surveillance footage review, and the systematic elimination of more than 400 tips. Yet Eleanor Adams remained as mysteriously absent as the day she'd vanished, her silver Honda Civic as elusive as a ghost haunting the prairie highways. "We've checked every silver Honda Civic registered in a 100-mile radius," Kowalski reported during the morning briefing, his voice betraying the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. 47 vehicles, all accounted for, all ruled out. Either Eleanor's car has been destroyed, hidden extremely well, or taken far outside our search area. The technical challenges of 2011 became increasingly apparent as the investigation deepened. Cell phone tracking technology, while improving, couldn't provide the precise location data that would become standard years later. Eleanor's phone had simply vanished from the network at 9:03 p.m. on March 15th. Offering no clues about direction of travel or final location. Today we'd have GPS data, detailed tower pings, maybe even automatic crash detection, explained Detective Sarah Chen, who'd been assigned to assist with the technical aspects of the case. But in 2011, once the phone went dark, it was like Eleanor had been erased from the digital world. The mall's security system proved equally frustrating. While cameras had captured Eleanor's final moments inside the building, the exterior coverage was sporadic and poorly maintained. The employee parking area, despite being identified as a security in previous reports, remained a blind spot where anything could have happened without a digital witness. More troubling was the discovery that the parking lot's single functioning exterior camera had been positioned incorrectly, pointing toward an empty section of asphalt rather than the employee spaces. A maintenance error from 6 months earlier had never been corrected, creating the perfect conditions for an unobserved crime. Forensic analysis of Eleanor's apartment and vehicle registration provided few leads. Her personal life was remarkably uncomplicated. No romantic drama, no financial difficulties, No involvement with drugs or dangerous activities. Eleanor Adams appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a dedicated student with simple pleasures and strong family connections. Sometimes the hardest cases to solve are the ones where nothing is wrong, observed Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a criminal psychologist consulted by the sheriff's department. When there's no obvious motive, no clear suspect pool, no apparent risk factors, you're essentially searching for a needle in a haystack the size of North Dakota. The polygraph examinations, administered to Eleanor's family members, co-workers, and friends, yielded no deceptive responses. Everyone who knew Eleanor passed their tests, their grief and confusion registering as genuine on the sensitive instruments. While polygraphs weren't admissible in court, they helped investigators focus their attention on more promising leads. Financial records revealed nothing suspicious. Eleanor's bank account showed typical college student transactions. Her credit card had last been used for textbook purchases 3 days before her disappearance, and there were no unusual cash withdrawals or suspicious activities. Her digital footprint was equally clean, with social media posts reflecting normal student concerns about upcoming exams and weekend plans with friends. The search for Eleanor's vehicle expanded to include salvage yards, chop shops, and abandoned properties across 3 states. North Dakota Highway Patrol coordinated with law enforcement agencies in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Montana, distributing detailed descriptions and photographs of Eleanor's Honda Civic to every officer in the region. "We've checked every body of water within 200 miles, reported Search and Rescue Coordinator James Peterson during a press briefing. "Every quarry, every pond, every section of river where a vehicle might have gone unnoticed. We've used sonar, dive teams, and aerial surveys. If Eleanor's car went into water, we should have found it by now." The absence of physical evidence began to suggest either extremely careful planning or incredible luck on the part of whoever was responsible for Eleanor's disappearance. No blood, no DNA evidence, no signs of struggle had been discovered, despite extensive forensic examination of the mall parking lot and surrounding areas. DNA samples collected from Eleanor's apartment and vehicle were preserved for future analysis, but 2011 technology couldn't extract useful profiles from the limited trace evidence available. Touch DNA analysis was still in its infancy, and the sophisticated techniques that would later revolutionize cold case investigations remained years in the future. As spring progressed into summer, the active investigation began to wind down. Search teams were reassigned to other cases. Volunteer efforts diminished as initial enthusiasm gave way to resigned acceptance, and the media attention that had kept Eleanor's story in the public eye gradually shifted to newer tragedies. "We're not giving up," Sheriff Morrison assured Eleanor's family during a difficult meeting in late June. "This case will remain active, and we'll follow every new lead that comes in. But we have to be realistic about our current capabilities and resources." The Eleanor Adams case was officially transferred to the Cold Case Division, joining dozens of other unsolved mysteries that haunted North Dakota law enforcement. Her file, containing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and forensic analyses, was carefully preserved in the hope that future technology or a witness's change of heart might eventually provide the breakthrough that had remained so frustratingly elusive. But for Patricia Adams, watching from her kitchen window as another summer sunset painted the prairie sky in shades of orange and pink, the investigation's suspension felt like a second disappearance, this time of hope itself. The seasons changed with merciless predictability around the Adams family home on Elm Street. But inside, time seemed frozen at 8:52 p.m. As autumn leaves fell and snow began to dust the North Dakota landscape. The Eleanor Adams investigation quietly shifted from active to cold, though no one had the heart to officially inform Patricia Adams of this administrative change. Every evening at dusk, Patricia performed her ritual with the solemnity of a religious observance. She would walk to the front porch, flip the switch that illuminated the simple brass lantern beside their door, and stand for a moment gazing down the empty street. The light had burned continuously for 8 months now, visible from 3 blocks away like a beacon calling Eleanor home through the darkness. "That light stays on until she walks through this door," Patricia would tell anyone who asked, her voice carrying the fierce determination that had sustained her through the longest months of her life. Eleanor's coming home. She just needs to see where home is. Robert Adams dealt with his grief differently, throwing himself into physical projects with an intensity that worried his wife. He'd rebuilt their back deck twice, installed new gutters, and started construction on a garden shed that Eleanor had once mentioned wanting. Every hammered nail and sawed board was a prayer offered to whatever gods might still be listening. The couple's relationship strained under the weight of unresolved grief. Robert's pragmatic nature whispered that Eleanor was gone, while Patricia's maternal instinct insisted their daughter was alive somewhere, waiting to be found. They moved around each other in their modest home like polite strangers, united in love, but divided by coping mechanisms that pulled them in opposite directions. Christmas 2011 arrived with particular cruelty. Patricia insisted on maintaining every tradition. Eleanor's stocking hung from the mantel, her favorite peppermint bark sat untouched under the tree, and her place was set at the dinner table. Robert participated silently, his heart breaking as he watched his wife wrap presents for a daughter who might never open them. She could come home any day, Patricia explained to concerned relatives who gently suggested scaling back the preparations. Eleanor needs to know that nothing has changed, that we're still here waiting for her. The community's support, so overwhelming in those first desperate weeks, gradually diminished as people returned to their own lives and immediate concerns. Well-meaning friends stopped asking about the investigation. Former volunteers passed Patricia in grocery store aisles with awkward smiles and quickly averted eyes. The missing person posters that had once covered every public surface in Bismarck slowly disappeared, replaced by advertisements for upcoming sales and community events. Eleanor's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it. That final Tuesday morning, Patricia cleaned it weekly, dusting furniture and changing sheets that never needed changing. The room had become a shrine to interrupted possibility. Textbooks still open to pages Eleanor would never finish reading. Clothes she would never wear again folded neatly in drawers that Patricia organized and reorganized with obsessive care. Detective Kowalski maintained contact with the family, calling every few weeks to assure them the case remained under review. These conversations, initially a source of hope, gradually became exercises in polite disappointment, as each call brought no new developments, no fresh leads, no movement toward resolution. "We received 3 tips this month," Kowalski would report during his calls to Patricia. "All investigated, all ruled out, but we're still actively working the case, Mrs. Adams. Something will break eventually." Patricia documented every interaction with law enforcement in a notebook that grew thick with dates, times, and summaries of conversations. She'd developed her own filing system for tips called in by concerned citizens, maintaining detailed records of information that police had already investigated and dismissed. Her dining room table disappeared under stacks of papers, photographs, and maps marked with locations where Eleanor might have been taken. The first anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance approached like a storm system visible on the horizon, inevitable and devastating. Local media contacted the family about commemorative stories, well-meaning organizers suggested memorial services, and the sheriff's department prepared renewed public appeals for information. Patricia rejected all suggestions of memorial services with the vehemence of a mother protecting her child. "Memorials are for dead people," she stated firmly. "Eleanor is missing, not dead. We're not memorializing anything except our determination to bring her home." Instead, on March 15, 2012, Patricia organized a candlelight vigil in Memorial Park, calling it a hope rally rather than a memorial service. Nearly 100 people attended, holding flickering flames against the evening wind, as speakers shared memories of Eleanor and renewed their commitment to never giving up the search. "1 year ago, our daughter disappeared," Patricia addressed the crowd, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "But love doesn't disappear. Hope doesn't disappear. Tomorrow morning, Eleanor's light will still be burning on our porch, and it will keep burning until she comes home." As the mourners, though Patricia would never use that word, dispersed into the North Dakota night, the porch light on Elm Street continued its patient vigil. It would burn through thunderstorms and blizzards, through power outages and family arguments, through the second anniversary and the third, and all the years that followed. Because somewhere in Patricia Adams' unbreakable heart, It was always 8:52 p.m. on March 15th, and Eleanor was still on her way home, needing only a light to guide her through the darkness. By 2015, 4 years after Eleanor Adams vanished into the prairie night, Bismarck had learned to live with the uncomfortable reality that some questions have no answers. The Gateway Mall had undergone renovations, adding modern LED lighting to the employee parking area and upgrading security cameras, improvements that came too late to help Eleanor but might protect future workers from similar fates. The city's collective memory of the case had settled into that peculiar space, reserved for unresolved tragedies, present enough to resurface during late-night conversations and community gatherings, but buried deeply enough that daily life could continue without constant reminder of how quickly safety could dissolve into a nightmare. Eleanor's disappearance had become Bismarck's most famous unsolved mystery, a story parents used to warn their children about staying alert and checking in regularly. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, a sociology professor at the University of North Dakota, who had studied the case's impact on local culture, noted how the community had adapted to living with uncertainty. Eleanor Adams represents every parent's worst fear, Morrison explained during a lecture on community trauma responses. But rather than paralyzing the city with fear, her case has created a heightened sense of collective responsibility. People watch out for each other differently now. The changes were subtle but pervasive. Parents implemented stricter curfews and insisted on detailed itineraries from their adult children. Local businesses, particularly those employing young women, instituted new safety protocols, buddy systems for closing shifts, security escorts to parking areas, and improved lighting around employee entrances. The Barnes & Noble where Eleanor had worked became almost obsessive about staff safety, implementing check-in procedures that some employees found intrusive but most appreciated. High school graduation parties and college send-offs now routinely included conversations about personal safety that previous generations had never needed. Eleanor's story had become a cautionary tale woven into the fabric of local parenting, a reminder that evil could strike anywhere, even in communities where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors implicitly. The annual Hope Rally that Patricia Adams organized every March 15th gradually evolved from a search-focused gathering into something more complex, part memorial, part community affirmation, part defiant refusal to let Eleanor's memory fade. Attendance varied year by year, swelling during significant anniversaries and dwindling during harsh weather or competing community events, but the core group of supporters never wavered. Local law enforcement agencies used Eleanor's case as a training example for new officers, illustrating both the importance of thorough initial investigations and the frustrating reality that some crimes remain unsolved, despite exhaustive efforts. The case file had grown to encompass 3 large boxes of documents, photographs, and evidence samples, representing thousands of hours of investigative work that had yielded no arrests, no prosecutions, and no closure for the Adams family. Detective Kowalski, now nearing retirement, made Eleanor's case a personal mission that extended well beyond his professional obligations. He attended conferences on cold case investigation techniques, consulted with experts in forensic genealogy, and maintained correspondence with other investigators working similar disappearances across the Midwest. His office wall featured a map dotted with pins representing other missing persons cases that shared characteristics with Eleanor's disappearance: young women, vehicles that vanished along with their drivers, and investigations that had stalled despite intensive initial effort. Cold cases never really go cold, Kowalski would tell younger officers. They just wait for the right piece of technology or the right witness to come forward. Eleanor Adams is still out there somewhere, and someday, we're going to find out what happened to her. The transformation of investigative technology during the mid-2010s offered new hope for cases like Eleanor's. DNA analysis techniques that had been experimental in 2011 became standard practice by digital forensics capabilities expanded dramatically, allowing investigators to extract information from devices that would have been impossible to analyze years earlier. GPS tracking became ubiquitous, making disappearances like Eleanor's increasingly difficult to accomplish without leaving digital breadcrumbs. But these advances also highlighted what had been lost in Eleanor's case. The early hours and days when digital evidence might have been recoverable, when witness memories were fresh, when physical evidence had not yet degraded or been contaminated. Every breakthrough in forensic science served as a reminder of how different things might have been if Eleanor had disappeared just a few years later. The Bismarck Tribune continued covering Eleanor's story annually, usually around the anniversary of her disappearance. These articles served multiple purposes: keeping the case in public awareness, appealing for new tips or witnesses, and documenting how the community had changed in response to the tragedy. Reporter Amanda Stevens, who had covered the original story as a young journalist, made Eleanor's case a cornerstone of her career, developing sources within law enforcement and maintaining relationships with the Adams family that went beyond professional obligation. Some stories choose you rather than the other way around, Stevens reflected in a 2017 editorial. Eleanor Adams chose all of us in Bismarck. Her disappearance changed how we think about safety, community, and the responsibility we have for each other. Even if we never learn what happened to her, Eleanor's impact on this city will endure. As the years accumulated, Eleanor's case began attracting attention from true crime enthusiasts, amateur investigators, and online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. Podcasts featured her story, web sleuths analyzed every available detail, and social media groups shared theories and tips that ranged from plausible to bizarre. While most of this attention proved unhelpful, it kept Eleanor's name alive in ways that formal law enforcement couldn't match. The porch light on Elm Street continued burning through it all, through thunderstorms that knocked out power to half the city, through blizzards that buried Bismarck under feet of snow, through the long summer evenings when daylight made the bulb seem redundant. Patricia Adams replaced it religiously when it burned out, always with the same wattage, and always with a prayer that this might be the night Eleanor would see it and come home. Because in a community that had learned to live with an unsolved mystery, hope remained the most powerful form of resistance against the darkness that had claimed one of their own. On a cold February morning in 2023, nearly 12 years after Eleanor Adams disappeared, forensic scientist Dr. Lisa Chen arrived at the North Dakota State Crime Laboratory, carrying a briefcase that would change everything. Inside were evidence samples that had been preserved since 2011, waiting for technology that didn't exist when Eleanor vanished, to finally catch up with the questions that had haunted Bismarck for over a decade. The breakthrough had been building for months. Through a combination of technological advancement and bureaucratic persistence, Detective Maria Santos, who had inherited Eleanor's case when Ray Kowalski retired in 2019, had successfully argued for funding to retest key evidence using next-generation genome sequencing techniques that could extract genetic profiles from trace amounts of biological material. When this case was first investigated, we needed relatively large samples to get usable DNA profiles, Dr. Chen explained to Detective Santos, as they prepared to examine fiber samples found in the Gateway Mall employee parking area. Today, we can work with just a few cells. Material that was considered inconclusive in 2011 might tell us everything we need to know. The State Crime Lab's new equipment hummed quietly in the background as Dr. Chen prepared the evidence for analysis. The Advanced STR Short Tandem Repeat Analysis System could detect DNA from samples as small as picograms, amounts so tiny they were measured in trillionths of a gram. Touch DNA analysis, which had been experimental when Eleanor disappeared, was now standard practice for extracting genetic profiles from surfaces that suspects had merely brushed against. The fiber samples that would prove crucial had been collected from Eleanor's car keys, found in the mall parking lot the morning after her disappearance. In 2011, investigators had noted foreign fibers on the keyring, but couldn't extract useful DNA profiles using available technology. Those same fibers, preserved in sterile containers at precise temperatures for 12 years, were about to reveal their secrets. The beauty of modern forensic science is that it's constantly looking backward, Dr. Chen noted as she began the delicate process of sample preparation. Every cold case is potentially one technological breakthrough away from being solved. The first indication that something significant was developing came 3 days later, when Dr. Chen's initial screening detected the presence of male DNA on fibers that had no business containing genetic material from anyone other than Eleanor. The foreign DNA was present in sufficient quantity to generate a complete profile, 13 genetic markers that would serve as a unique fingerprint identifying whoever had touched Eleanor's keys during her final moments in the parking lot. Detective Santos felt her pulse quicken as she reviewed the preliminary results. After 12 years of dead ends and disappointments, Eleanor's case had finally produced the kind of evidence that could lead to arrests and prosecutions. The DNA profile was complete, high quality, and ready for comparison against databases containing millions of genetic profiles from convicted felons, arrestees, and voluntary submissions. "We're about to find out who was in that parking lot with Eleanor Adams," Santos told her supervisor, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, son of the now-retired sheriff, who had originally worked the case. "After all these years, we might finally have our answer." The first database search, conducted through the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, yielded no direct matches. The genetic profile didn't belong to anyone currently in the federal database of convicted felons. But Dr. had expected this outcome. Many crimes are committed by people who had never been arrested or convicted of previous offenses. The real breakthrough came when the profile was submitted for familial DNA searching, a technique that had revolutionized cold case investigations across the country. Rather than looking for exact matches, familial searching identified genetic profiles that shared significant numbers of markers with the unknown sample, indicating possible family relationships. Within 48 hours, the database search identified 3 potential familial matches, individuals whose DNA shared enough markers with the unknown profile to suggest they were related to whoever had touched Eleanor's keys. Each match represented a possible pathway to identifying the suspect through genetic genealogy techniques that combine traditional DNA analysis with family tree research. Dr. Chen worked with specialized genetic genealogists to construct family trees for each potential match, tracing relationships through public records, ancestry databases, and genealogical websites. The process was painstaking and required cross-referencing multiple sources, but gradually, a picture began to emerge of interconnected family lines that had lived in North Dakota for generations. Genetic genealogy is like solving a massive puzzle, where half the pieces are missing, explained genealogist Rebecca Martinez, who had been consulted on dozens of similar cases. But when you find the right connections, everything suddenly clicks into place. The breakthrough moment came on March 10, 2023, just 5 days before the 12th anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance. The genetic genealogy analysis had narrowed the suspect pool to a single family line, and within that family, only one individual fit the profile, a 48-year-old man who had lived in Bismarck during 2011 and had no known connection to Eleanor Adams. His name was Michael Thompson, and he had been hiding in plain sight for 12 years, living just 6 blocks from the Adams family home, working as a respected auto mechanic, and maintaining the appearance of a model citizen, while carrying the secret of what had happened to Eleanor Adams on that March night, when the world changed forever. As Detective Santos prepared to obtain a court order for a direct DNA sample from Thompson, she thought about Patricia Adams and the porch light that had burned faithfully for over 4,000 nights. Finally, after 12 years of darkness, science had illuminated the path to truth. The investigation that had seemed impossibly complex was about to become dramatically simple: match the DNA, make the arrest, and answer the questions that had haunted a community for more than a decade. The warrant for Michael Thompson's DNA sample was signed at 3:47 p.m. on March 13, 2023, by Judge Patricia Henley in a Burleigh County courtroom, where the Eleanor Adams case had been discussed in hushed tones for over a decade. Detective Santos held the legal document with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the weight of knowing that 12 years of questions were about to be answered. Michael Thompson lived in a modest ranch house on Riverside Drive, 6 blocks from where Patricia Adams had kept her vigil light burning for 4. His property was meticulously maintained, with a well-tended lawn and a detached garage where he operated Thompson's Auto Repair, a small but successful business that had served Bismarck residents for nearly 2 decades. The irony was devastating in its simplicity. Eleanor Adams had disappeared while Thompson was establishing an alibi by working late in his garage, visible to neighbors and customers, who would later vouch for his presence during the time investigators initially focused on. His business records showed he'd been performing routine maintenance on a customer's vehicle until nearly 11 p.m. that March evening, providing what seemed like an airtight alibi that had kept him off investigators' radar for over a decade. Thompson was the perfect suspect hiding in plain sight, Detective Santos would later reflect. Respected community member, solid business reputation, no criminal record, and an alibi that seemed unshakable. He was never even on our list of people to interview. The genetic genealogy investigation had revealed Thompson's connection to the DNA evidence through a complex family tree that traced back to Norwegian immigrants who had settled in North Dakota his second cousin, a woman who had submitted her DNA to a genealogy website to research her family history, had unknowingly provided the genetic breadcrumbs that led investigators to Thompson's door. Surveillance teams had been watching Thompson for 3 days prior to serving the warrant, documenting his routines and ensuring he posed no flight risk. His behavior appeared completely normal. He opened his garage at 7 a.m. sharp, worked on customer vehicles throughout the day, and returned to his house each evening to tend his garden and watch television. Nothing in his demeanor suggested awareness that 12 years of deception were about to unravel. When Detective Santos and her team arrived at Thompson's auto repair on the morning of March 14th, they found him replacing brake pads on a blue pickup truck, his hands stained with grease and his radio playing classic rock at low volume. The garage smelled of motor oil and metal shavings, filled with the tools and equipment of a craftsman who took pride in his work. "Michael Thompson?" Santos called out, her badge visible as she approached the work bay. Thompson looked up from the brake assembly, wiping his hands on a shop rag with practiced casualness. "Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you officers?" His initial demeanor revealed nothing suspicious, curiosity mixed with the mild concern any citizen might feel when approached by police. But Detective Santos, trained to observe micro-expressions and behavioral changes, noticed the slight tightening around Thompson's eyes when she mentioned Eleanor Adams' name. "We're investigating the Eleanor Adams disappearance from 2011, Santos explained, producing the court order. "We have a warrant requiring you to provide a DNA sample for comparison to evidence in the case." The change in Thompson's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of something between fear and resignation that lasted perhaps 2 seconds before being replaced by practiced confusion. "Eleanor Adams? I remember hearing about that case, but I don't understand why you'd need my DNA. I didn't know her." The swab collection took less than 2 minutes, but Thompson's behavior during those moments told investigators everything they needed to know. His hands shook slightly as he signed the evidence receipt, and perspiration appeared on his forehead despite the cool March morning. When asked routine questions about his whereabouts in March 2011, his answers were suspiciously detailed for events that had occurred 12 years earlier. "Most innocent people can't remember what they did last month, let alone over a decade ago," Santos noted in her report. Thompson provided minute-by-minute details of his activities on March 15, 2011, the kind of perfect recollection that typically indicates someone has rehearsed their story many times. The DNA comparison results were expedited through the state crime lab, with Dr. Chen working around the clock to process the sample and generate a comparative analysis. The genetic profile extracted from Thompson's buccal swab was compared against the foreign DNA found on Eleanor's keyring, using 13 different markers that provided statistical certainty beyond any reasonable doubt. At 2:15 p.m. on March 15, 2023, exactly 12 years and 24 hours after Eleanor Adams had sent her final text message, Dr. Chen called Detective Santos with results that would transform a cold case into an active murder investigation. "It's a match," Dr. Chen announced, her voice carrying the weight of scientific certainty. 13 out of 13 markers. The probability of this being a coincidence is less than 1 in several billion. Michael Thompson's DNA is on Eleanor Adams' keys. The confirmation sent shockwaves through the investigative team and the broader law enforcement community. After 12 years of theories, dead ends, and frustrated hopes, Eleanor's case had been solved by microscopic evidence that Thompson probably never realized he had left behind. The foreign fibers on her keyring had preserved his genetic signature through more than 4,000 days of waiting, protecting the evidence until technology could finally decode its message. As Detective Santos prepared to obtain an arrest warrant, she thought about the cruel geography of the case. Thompson had been living within walking distance of the Adams family home throughout their entire ordeal. He had probably driven past their house countless times, seeing Patricia Adams tend her garden and maintain her vigil light, knowing exactly why that light burned and what had happened to the daughter who would never come home. The investigation was far from over, but the most important question had finally been answered. Eleanor Adams hadn't vanished into thin air or been taken by a random stranger passing through town. She had been betrayed by a neighbor, someone who had lived among the community that mourned her disappearance while carrying the secret of his crime through 12 years of ordinary days and sleepless nights. Michael Thompson's double life was about to end, and Eleanor Adams would finally have justice. The arrest warrant for Michael Thompson was signed at 6:23 a.m. on March 16, 2023, as dawn broke over Bismarck with unseasonable warmth that felt like the earth itself was awakening from a long winter's nightmare. Detective Santos had spent the night coordinating with the district attorney's office, ensuring that every procedural detail was perfect for a case that had waited 12 years for this moment. Thompson was taken into custody at his home as he prepared for another ordinary day of automotive repair. Neighbors who had known him for decades watched in stunned silence as police officers led him away in handcuffs, his head down and his expression unreadable behind the facade that had fooled an entire community for over a decade. Margaret Kelly, who lived next door to Thompson and had borrowed tools from him countless times, stood in her bathrobe on her front porch, struggling to process what she was witnessing. "Michael helped my husband fix our mower just last weekend," she told a reporter who arrived minutes after the arrest. "He's fixed our cars for years. This can't be right. There has to be some mistake." But there was no mistake. Within hours of Thompson's arrest, search warrants were executed on his home, garage, and business property. Crime scene technicians wearing protective suits methodically documented and collected evidence that might connect Thompson to Eleanor's disappearance, working with the precision of surgeons and the patience of archaeologists, uncovering ancient secrets. The search of Thompson's garage revealed a disturbing level of mechanical expertise that could have made disposing of a vehicle relatively simple. Hydraulic lifts, cutting torches, and metalworking equipment filled the space where Thompson had built his reputation as Bismarck's most reliable auto mechanic. Investigators began to understand how Eleanor's Honda Civic could have vanished so completely. It had probably been systematically dismantled and destroyed by someone who understood exactly how to make a car disappear piece by piece. Hidden beneath a false floor in Thompson's basement workshop, investigators discovered items that made their blood run cold: Eleanor's driver's license, her student ID card, and a small silver bracelet her parents had given her for Christmas. The trophies had been preserved like museum pieces, wrapped in plastic and stored in a moisture-proof container that suggested Thompson had intended to keep them indefinitely. Finding Eleanor's personal items in Thompson's possession was the final confirmation we needed. Detective Santos explained during a press briefing. These weren't items that could have been transferred accidentally. They represented a deliberate decision to keep souvenirs of his crime. The revelation that Eleanor's killer had been living among them for 12 years sent shockwaves through Bismarck that registered beyond mere surprise into genuine trauma. Thompson had repaired vehicles for dozens of families whose daughters might have been Eleanor's age. He had attended community events, shopped at local businesses, and participated in the ordinary social fabric that binds small cities together. Pastor Michael Hendricks, who had led prayers for Eleanor's safe return at Prairie Rose Baptist Church for over a decade, struggled to find words for his congregation when he learned that Thompson had occasionally attended services during the years following Eleanor's disappearance. "Evil doesn't announce itself," Pastor Hendricks told his stunned parishioners during an emergency evening service. "Sometimes it wears a familiar face, and offers to fix our cars. We've all been betrayed, not just Eleanor's family. The psychological impact on Thompson's customers was particularly severe. Sarah Martinez realized that Thompson had serviced her daughter's car just 6 months earlier, changing the oil and checking the brakes while making friendly conversation about college and career plans. The thought that her daughter had been alone with Eleanor's killer in his isolated garage made Sarah physically ill. How many young women went to his shop over the years? Sarah asked during a community meeting hastily organized to address residents' fears. How close did he come to doing it again? Thompson's interrogation, conducted in the same interview room, where hundreds of witnesses had been questioned about Eleanor's disappearance, revealed the methodical mind of someone who had planned his crime carefully and hidden his tracks expertly. He initially denied knowing Eleanor beyond recognizing her from news coverage, but faced with DNA evidence and the discovery of her personal items, his denials gradually crumbled. The confession, when it finally came, was delivered in the flat, emotionless tone of someone describing routine automotive maintenance. Thompson admitted to following Eleanor from the mall, forcing her into his vehicle in the parking lot, and taking her to his garage where he killed her to prevent identification. He had dismantled her car over several weeks, selling parts individually, and disposing of the frame in a remote section of the Missouri River where it would never be found. He talked about Eleanor like she was a mechanical problem he had solved. Detective Santos would later recall. No emotion, no remorse, just a step-by-step description of how he had planned and executed the perfect crime. The location of Eleanor's remains became the final piece of the puzzle that had tormented her family for 12 years. Thompson led investigators to a remote farm property he had purchased in 2012, where Eleanor's body had been buried beneath a concrete slab that he had told neighbors was the foundation for a future workshop. The recovery operation took 3 days, with forensic anthropologists carefully excavating remains that confirmed Eleanor's identity through dental records. After 4,382 days of not knowing, Patricia Adams finally had an answer to the question that had consumed her life. Eleanor was never coming home, but she could finally rest. As news of the arrest and confession spread through Bismarck, the community struggled to process the betrayal of trust that Thompson's deception represented. He had been present during the search efforts, had expressed sympathy for the Adams family, and had continued his normal business routine while Eleanor's body lay buried on his property. The evil that had taken Eleanor Adams hadn't come from outside their community. It had been living among them all along, hiding behind the mask of neighborly reliability and mechanical expertise that had made Michael Thompson seem like the most trustworthy man in town. The Burleigh County Courthouse had never seen crowds like those that gathered each day during the trial of Michael Thompson in September 2023. The proceedings, which began exactly 12 years and 6 months after Eleanor Adams disappeared, drew national media attention and filled the courtroom beyond capacity with family members, community residents, and journalists, covering what had become North Dakota's most closely watched criminal case in decades. Judge Patricia Henley, who had presided over countless cases during her 20-year career, opened the proceedings by acknowledging the unique emotional weight of a case that had haunted Bismarck for over a decade. This trial represents not just the pursuit of justice for Eleanor Adams, she told the packed courtroom, but an opportunity for our entire community to finally find some measure of closure. District Attorney Michael Richardson, prosecuting his final major case before retirement, had spent months preparing evidence that told Eleanor's story with scientific precision and emotional power. The DNA evidence was overwhelming. Thompson's genetic profile on Eleanor's keys, combined with her personal items found in his basement, created a forensic narrative that left no reasonable doubt about his guilt. Eleanor Adams was 21 years old when her life was stolen from her, Richardson told the jury during opening statements. She was walking to her car after an ordinary shift at work, thinking about studying with her roommate and having dinner with her family. She had no reason to fear Michael Thompson, a trusted member of our community who used that trust to commit the ultimate betrayal. Thompson's defense attorney, court-appointed counsel David Miller, faced the impossible task of defending a client whose confession had been recorded and whose possession of the victim's personal items eliminated any possibility of mistaken identity. Miller's strategy focused on mental health mitigation, arguing that Thompson suffered from severe psychological disorders that had driven him to commit acts he wouldn't normally contemplate. "My client is profoundly mentally ill," Miller argued during his opening statement. "This doesn't excuse his actions, but it helps explain how someone with no criminal history could commit such a terrible crime. Michael Thompson needs treatment, not just punishment." The prosecution's case unfolded with methodical precision over 6 days of testimony. Dr. Lisa Chen explained the DNA evidence in terms that jurors could understand, describing how genetic material smaller than a grain of sand had preserved the truth for 12 years. Crime scene investigators detailed the search of Thompson's property and the discovery of Eleanor's remains. Digital forensics experts showed how Thompson had researched body disposal methods and concrete mixing techniques in the weeks following Eleanor's disappearance. Patricia Adams took the witness stand on the 4th day of testimony, her voice steady but her hands shaking as she identified Eleanor's bracelet, the one Thompson had kept as a trophy. "I gave this to my daughter for Christmas in 2010, she testified. "She wore it every day. It was the last gift I ever gave her." The courtroom fell silent as Patricia described the 12 years of not knowing, the thousands of nights she had kept Eleanor's porch light burning, and the corrosive uncertainty that had defined her family's existence since March. When she finished testifying, even experienced court officers were wiping away tears. Robert Adams followed his wife to the witness stand. His testimony focused on the practical details of how Eleanor's disappearance had affected their daily lives. He described rebuilding their back deck while hoping Eleanor would return to enjoy it, organizing search parties that found no trace of their daughter, and learning to live with the possibility that they might never know what happened to her. The defense's case lasted less than 2 days and consisted primarily of expert testimony about Thompson's psychological state. Rebecca Hoffman, a forensic psychiatrist, diagnosed Thompson with antisocial personality disorder and sexual sadism, conditions she argued had compelled his criminal behavior while allowing him to maintain the facade of normal community membership. Mr. Thompson's mental illness explains his ability to compartmentalize his crime while continuing to function in society, Dr. Hoffman testified. He genuinely believed he could hide his actions indefinitely because his disorder prevented him from experiencing normal guilt or remorse. But Thompson's own words, recorded during his confession, undermined the defense's mental illness arguments. His detailed, methodical description of planning and executing Eleanor's murder demonstrated clear awareness of right and wrong, legal consequences, and the need to conceal evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict that surprised no one but still sent waves of emotion through the courtroom. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced, his voice carrying the weight of collective justice finally achieved. Thompson showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read, maintaining the same emotionless demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. Eleanor's family embraced each other as 12 years of uncertainty finally ended with legal confirmation of what they had suspected but never been able to prove. Judge Henley scheduled sentencing for October 15th, allowing time for victim impact statements and pre-sentence investigations. During the 3-week interval, the community began processing not just Thompson's conviction, but the larger implications of how thoroughly he had deceived everyone who knew him. The sentencing hearing drew even larger crowds than the trial itself. Patricia Adams delivered a victim impact statement that will be remembered as one of the most powerful speeches ever heard in the Burleigh County Courthouse. "Michael Thompson took more than my daughter's life," she told the court, looking directly at the man who had caused her family 12 years of torment. "He took our peace, our trust, our ability to feel safe in our own community, but he didn't take our love for Eleanor, and he didn't take our determination to see justice done." Judge Henley sentenced Thompson to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty available under North Dakota law. "This crime represents a fundamental betrayal of community trust," she stated during sentencing. "Eleanor Adams deserved to live a full life, and her family deserved to know what happened to her. While nothing can restore what was lost, This sentence ensures that Michael Thompson will never again have the opportunity to harm another innocent person. As Thompson was led away in shackles to begin serving a sentence that would end only with his death, Patricia Adams walked out of the courthouse and drove directly home to Elm Street. That evening, for the first time in 4,164 nights, she turned off Eleanor's porch light. The darkness that had claimed her daughter was finally over, and Eleanor Adams could rest in peace. The story of Eleanor Adams reminds us that justice, while sometimes delayed, need never be denied. In our age of rapidly advancing forensic science, evidence speaks across decades with a clarity that would have seemed impossible when Eleanor disappeared on that cold March evening. Her case demonstrates the profound power of persistence, both technological and human, to illuminate even the darkest secrets. The DNA sample that solved Eleanor's case had been waiting 12 years for technology to catch up with truth. Those microscopic genetic traces, invisible to investigators in 2011, became the key that unlocked a mystery that had defined a community's fears and a family's grief. Every cold case represents similar potential, evidence preserved in hope that future science will provide answers that current capabilities cannot deliver. Patricia Adams' unwavering determination offers lessons that extend far beyond criminal investigation. Her refusal to accept defeat, symbolized by the porch light that burned for over 4,000 nights, demonstrates how hope can sustain families through seemingly impossible circumstances. The light that guided Eleanor home was metaphorical as much as literal, a beacon of love that proved stronger than the darkness that had claimed her daughter. The community's response to Eleanor's disappearance reveals both the vulnerability and resilience that defined small-city America. Bismarck discovered that evil could hide behind familiar faces, that trust could be weaponized by those who understood how to exploit it. But they also learned that collective determination could sustain hope across more than a decade, that neighborhoods could rally around families in crisis, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, remained achievable through persistence and technological advancement. Michael Thompson's deception, living for 12 years among the people he had betrayed, serves as a sobering reminder that predators often hide in plain sight. His ability to maintain the facade of respectability while secretly harboring evidence of his crime challenges our assumptions about who can be trusted and how evil conceals itself within normal society. For law enforcement, Eleanor's case illustrates both the limitations of past investigative techniques and the extraordinary potential of modern forensic science. Evidence that seemed inconclusive in 2011 became definitive proof in 2023, suggesting that every preserved sample, every carefully documented scene, represents hope for future resolution. The advancement of genetic genealogy and familial DNA searching has revolutionized cold case investigation, transforming cases once considered unsolvable into active prosecutions. Eleanor's case joins hundreds of others, solved through similar techniques, each representing a family finally receiving answers and a community finally understanding what happened to one of their own. Perhaps most importantly, Eleanor Adams' story demonstrates that every missing person represents more than statistics or case files. They are daughters and sons, sisters and brothers, individuals whose absence creates holes in the fabric of families and communities that can only be healed through truth and justice. Eleanor's light, kept burning for 14 years by a mother's unshakable faith, now rests in peace. Her story reminds us that in the darkest cases, when hope seems impossible and answers appear forever beyond reach, science and determination can still illuminate the path to justice. The truth, preserved in microscopic evidence and sustained by love, will eventually shine through even the longest nights of uncertainty and pain. In Eleanor Adams' memory, may every family searching for missing loved ones find the strength to keep their lights burning, and may every investigation benefit from the lesson her case teaches, that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that love, persistent and advancing technology can overcome even the most carefully concealed crimes.